So, Paola, welcome to the show. How's things?
Oh, fine. On this side of the pond, this side of the pond, I think that the subject matter we're talking about, Vinny, is so interesting that my mind is always working. I'm always working on it. It's just so interesting.
It is, absolutely. I guess that would lead into my first question. How did this all start for you? When did the UFO subject first come into your life?
Well, first of all, people ought to know that I approach this very academically. I have a master's in education. I taught high school English in the United States and in Rome, Italy for 15 years at the American Overseas School. So I have this background in education. And in 1970, I think it was eight, I was given the class science fiction to teach here in Colorado. And of course, I had no interest in anything. I had no interest in UFOs or anything like that. But the movie, I had plenty of materials because Wars came out around then, and so did Close Encounters in 79. Well, when Close Encounters came out, and I figured I should go see it, at the very end of the film, when Francois Truffaut, who plays Jacques Vallée, is communicating with the ETs, I started to cry, and I didn't understand what was happening, why I had an emotional reaction. So then I began doing research, and I found out about Dr. J. Allen Hynek, CUFOS, the Center for UFO Studies, which at that time was like MUFON. There were several associations. There was APRO, there was CUFOS, there was MUFON. And I, by accident or design, was at a wedding in Evanston, Illinois, and decided to walk into the Center for UFO Studies just to see what they had. And they had all of these kind of bookcases and file cabinets. And I said to the secretary, I don't expect Dr. Hynek to be here, but is this stuff real? I mean, can I look at this? And she said, oh, Dr. Hynek is here. And he came from around the corner with his pipe, that famous pipe that you see in the movie. And he said, I heard you told my secretary you're Italian, you're from Italy. And I am. I was born in Italy and so forth. And he said, could you work with me? Working with an astronomer for 6 solid years, and I worked with him till the day he died, I knew it was real. I mean, I knew this was serious. I knew it was real. But I will add, Vinny, that I didn't want to deal with what was inside the craft. We were dealing with nuts and bolts. We were dealing with sightings, with physical traces cases, which is, if you know the classification of Close Encounters of the first, second, third, and fourth kind, we were dealing with, solid stuff. So it wasn't until later on that my life opened up to the other weirdness that was part of it. And then, as I didn't ever expect in a million years, I got to meet the man that was at that movie. He contacted me 6 years ago, Jacques Vallée, and we worked on a case together. Now, I, it sounds so weird, but I think it was all pre-programmed.
It does sound like that. Yeah, it's just amazing coincidence. And I mean, tell me more about J. Allen Hynek. I mean, it must have just been incredible to work with a man who, during the early days of Project Blue Book, pretty much didn't believe in this kind of thing, and eventually, he completely did a 180. And correct me if I'm wrong, was it not the Lonnie Zamora case of 1964 that changed J. Allen Hynek's mind on this subject?
Yeah, you did your homework. Yes, it's true. It's true in Socorro. In fact, we have the Lonnie Zamora case in Trinity. There's the 1945, the two little boys that saw the crash. Then there's Lonnie Zamora, I think in '64, and the third one is Valençol, the farmer in Midi in southern France, because the craft was an avocado shape. It was not a disc like we're used to seeing. So Jacques put those three cases. Yes, but it wasn't that he didn't believe it. You got to be careful here, because even if you're a professional and you're working in a university the way Allen was, uh, and you have funds coming in, or you have a pension, or for the government, he knew that he knew that the Air Force knew, but his job was to just stay with the facts. Um, you have to be careful about your reputation. So I think he was always interested in the paranormal and the esoteric. He was always the thing that I learned from him. Though people say, "Well, what did you learn from him?" Was that I would go off the deep end because he didn't drive. So when he came here to Boulder, or I was with him, I would drive him around. We were very close. I was close with Mimi, his wife, and his son Paul, who was 13 years old at the time. Now Paul is a good friend of mine. He's an adult. But at that time, I was flying off the handle when I'd hear contact cases and everything. And he said, Paula, he said, your job is to just listen. He said, listening is the most important thing. Because I was going, these people are crazy. Why are you spending time with them? It's like, but no, he said, your job is to listen. Listening, I think what he meant by that was listening, you can connect the dots of what you already know, and something will ring true. And that's been my career. That's why I can do it so well.
Amazing. That is just incredible. Really, really love hearing things like that. Well, Paolo, I'd love to move on. And something that I came across a few years ago, a case that really stuck out to me that I've never had the opportunity to discuss with anybody on the show, is the Italian case that began in 1956, the friendship case. And I obviously, through my research, realized that you're very familiar with it and have spoken about it. So if you don't mind, could you just give us an overview of what happened or what began in 1956?
Well, Vinny, I'm so glad you're asking because half the world doesn't even know this happened. I mean, I know because I had to go back to Giant Rock. I had to go back to Manjur Adamski. And believe it or not, I had met Desmond Leslie with Colonel Corso, and I didn't even know who Adamski was and it was 1998. And so I had to go back to research the communication with human type ETs. And I was already in Italy, so it was easy for me. I was working at the American Overseas School, and Stefano Brescia, who wrote 50 Years of Amicizia and Mass Contacts, he was like at all the conferences. So it was easy for me to sit and talk to him when he was alive. He kept that secret for a long time, though. I mean, again, he was a professor. He was afraid for his pension. He was afraid for his whatever um, his his reputation. And the thing is that when Stefano wrote Mass Contacts, I was the one to have it translated in English so that he could have access. And I've done this for so many people, for Ricardo Gonzalez, Contact from Planet Apu. I've done it for so many people because I'm kind of the bridge to bring real information. For me, the UFO field is mythology and the real stuff. And if you get the real stuff and it's another language, nobody can read it and nobody can ever know about it. So they form their opinions on the mythology, on what's out there in the media. So it was easy for me to ask Stefano about Bruno Samacicia and the people in the Amicizia experiment, and they were in Pescara, and we were always in Pescara. So I knew I had talked to the people that were there, especially the journalists that were covering this, because there are big tunnels of water coming out of the Adriatic, and the fishermen wouldn't go out. I mean, that's a physical thing. So we found out and they called them W56s, W for victory, and the year was 1956. And if you look at not 56 here, and you look at the Giant Rock guys over there, it's all in the same year. We're dealing with 1952, 53, 54, 55, 56. So it's very important that we look at this as a timeline. So what was that about? All right, well, there were these beings that would not say where they came from, that said to the 10 Italians, and I interviewed Gaspare di Lama and his wife. I didn't realize there were women involved, but Gaspare di Lama, who just died, when I interviewed him at 92 years old, said his wife was with him. And I was in their living room in Lake Como. Anything I do has to be in person on location. So if people can have some patience, they can go on my YouTube channel and see the interview of me talking to Gaspare in Lake Como. It's beautiful, Lake Como. And Gaspare is telling me that his wife was there, that the deal was this, that these beings, all sizes from 3 feet tall to 15-foot tall, and Gaspare and Bruno Samachicha and other people had film footage and photos of these guys. In fact, the cover of Mass Contacts is a photo. Um, and they're human looking, except some are tall and some are really short. And the deal was this: we will stay with you as long as you maintain something called Ureda. Ureda is a technology of harmony. In other words, they said, if you don't fight among yourselves, we can stay with you. But the minute you start arguing and fighting, it is against the technology of harmony. It was an experiment. So, if and obviously 10 years later it happened. One guy would say, oh, you saw them but you didn't tell me about it, or you went to see them and they invited you to that hillside and so forth. So that group did not maintain ureda, did not maintain harmony. But in the process, if you read 50 Years of Amicizia, it's very interesting. I talked to Gaspar, and he told me that that Samachicha was the one that finances, because these beings were in a castle near Rocapia. I mean, the one that was very, very tall. They had to make a special bed for him, and they would deliver and transport vegetables. They were vegetarian. Well, I've learned a lot about the human type contacts. Most of them are. They don't grow animals to kill on other planets. So most of them are. I mean, in the case of Howard Menger, they even gave him fruit and milk pods to examine the people from Venus. I've got not only the pictures of the milk pods and the fruit pods, but the labs he sent them to in 1963. See, if you bother to do the research, you find the connections. So what would happen is Samachicha, to finance the big trucks of vegetables and fruits that came in, Gaspar had told me they would take the driver into the cafe. Our cafes are coffee cafes, the bar, and then within minutes, the poor driver would go out and the truck was empty. Well, these people had, they had mastered teleportation, one by one by one. They had mastered teleportation. So the truck would be empty. And these are some of the stories that they would tell. The other stories that really interested me was, in order to contact them, they wouldn't knock on the door. They would use crystal radio. And I know back in the days of Van Tassel and Adamski, crystal radio was used to talk to the beings until the FBI stopped it. In the old days, you'd have to be born back then, okay? You could make your own crystal radio, and it would have a frequency in the 1950s. And it was like you pick up, the microphone and you'd be talking to somebody else that had a crystal radio. And so if you study, or if you happen to get the DVD about the friendship case, you'll realize that the only way that these Italian guys, would know when to meet them, where, and so forth, was they would talk to them on crystal radio. I interviewed Paolo Di Girolamo, who was part of that, and he said sometimes letters would fall from the sky, and he's no longer with us either. So these people, and it's important to me to go to the source. I don't know. I don't want to do people that knew people that knew people that, that to me is gossip. I had to be with people that had experienced this firsthand. So I thought it was amazing that this experiment happened. But I'm going to add, Vinny, that while I was studying the friendship case, I also ended up in Santiago, Chile, and I looked at the friendship case in Chile, and I interviewed Octavio Ortiz. I got there just in time. Ortiz is still alive, but Fuentes died. And that was also an experiment to live on the island of Chiloé with these beings that looked, and Ortiz. And people can go on my YouTube channel and get that Ortiz interview too, because that is so important. It's happening. The Chilean case, I think, happened in the 70s. You got to look at the timeline. The Italian case happened 56 to maybe 65, 1965. And not only that, but Consul Perigo, who's a consul, he was a kind of a minister in Italy, was involved, and the Vatican was involved. I mean, you can imagine cardinals were involved. So the Vatican knows everything about all of this stuff, and they're just hoping that they can get it under control, because one of the things about disclosure is nobody can really control that if they decide to disclose on the other side. So, the Vatican knew about it. Um, I think they said, well, they're not going to get along with humans anyway, so we don't have to worry about anything. They're not going to come back, and you can't take them to coffee.
So you mentioned there that on the cover of Mass Contact, is that the image of the tall gentleman that's kind of the most popular photo associated with the friendship case?
No, that's Kino. That's inside the book. On the outside is a guy with scuba gear.
Right. Okay.
He's got scuba gear, and Stefano told me that, and you have to get Mass Contacts, I think, on Amazon if it's still for sale. The scuba, and I can send it to you if you want it. Um, he told me that that was on two glass plates. So I don't know how photography was done in those days, but he's told me they put the two glass plates together. So I even got the details. That's not Photoshop. People ought to get off Photoshop, because Photoshop happened in 1992. Photoshop, I mean, I'm working now with the Billy Meyer case. People are crazy. They don't bother to do any kind of, they have an opinion without research. Photoshop came out in 1992. CGI came out after. So you're dealing with the 70s, the 60s, and the 50s, and even the 40s. We had 1945. So you have to look at everything in context of the geopolitical situation.
Understood. Understood. Now, there's another case from Italy that I always found quite incredible, to be honest. And this was the October 1954 sighting over the football stadium, the soccer stadium. So, what can you tell me about that case? I mean, I'm sure that's never been debunked.
No, but we had that happen in Bremen, Germany, too. Did you? The same thing over a football stadium. Yes. And I have another one that just happened in South America. You have to collect these things, so you have to know. But uh, first of all, that one was important because the game stopped, but what fell from the sky was something that was like filaments of glass that we call angel hair. So that was when we get, like Alan would say, this is close encounters of the second kind, when you have physical traces of something. That was analyzed. That was analyzed, the angel hair situation. Howard Menger's case had angel hair too. So what we call angel hair. I don't know if it's a residue from the craft or whatever it is, but if people had just gotten together, all the scientists and everybody, and had just done all the analysis, they would have had some answers. But there's these anecdotal things here, there, and everywhere that nobody bothers to connect. But that, the mass sighting over Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm going to be doing a masterclass with Lynn Kitai on the Phoenix lights. The one in Africa with the kids at the schoolhouse, the one in Westall in Australia, those mass events have an effect on the consciousness of the people. In other words, nobody's the same. To define consciousness, just means that you're fully aware of of everything around you. You're fully awake, and I'm come to the conclusion that when you have a UFO over a football stadium, it was a soccer stadium. I'm sorry, it changes something, and that is the only. I think that is the only real effort they're making. Here we are, get a clue, change something. It's not to go and make all these suppositions. Where do they come from? Are they here? Are they good? Are they bad? Are they here to eat us? And all these stupid things that I hear in the mythology. But for me, a sighting is to switch over your consciousness into another dimension and make you aware that you're something bigger than you think you are. You're part of this universe.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's the thing with these cases from so many years ago. It's just there's very little that these objects can be other than genuinely something anomalous. And I find that absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, and it shouldn't just be relegated to a certain group of people. We should have this in talking about this in the regular, everyday world, because it is not science fiction. I mean, we don't need the U.S. government to say UFOs are real. For God's sakes, we don't need other governments. The world have released their files. It is an interesting topic that needs to be researched, and unfortunately, too often it just becomes entertainment and sci-fi.
Now, I'd like to move on because you certainly are very well traveled in this subject. And a name that you've already mentioned briefly, Ricardo Gonzalez from Peru. Now, it's funny because I only became aware of this gentleman a couple of months ago. My girlfriend was researching, and she's of Peruvian descent. And so she said, "Oh, have you heard of this guy?" And I was like, "I haven't." So I did a little bit of looking into him and found his story to be absolutely mind blowing. So could you tell me about Ricardo Gonzalez and his experiences?
Yeah, can I tell you how I got there though? I began to realize that here in the United States, the whole entire field is infiltrated with abductions and stuff like that. And Jacques and I know that Jacques has paperwork, and I saw some in Europe, that a lot of these are staged. That people just I mean, you don't need 40 years of DNA testing. I mean, these stupid civilization, you can get it off a glass. You don't need to get it from people. So then I began to realize that the early movement, the early space brother movement, was human type beings that would get off ships. And that and then I began to really study Adamski and really study George Van Tassel. I went out there, I interviewed the people that were there, that are still around, because I waited too long. And this is real. These people came off spaceships, but when they realized they were going to be shot down for the technology, they had to go somewhere. So where they went is where you can have a connection, not with the brain, but with the heart. So they ended up in Peru, and they ended up in the Chilca Desert. And I've been there. I've been to the Chilca Desert, and they ended up around a group of young boys that were led by Sisto Paz Wells. Sisto Paz and his brother Charlie. And with automatic writing, the beings, and they said they came from everywhere. Axel came from the moon of Ganymede. Um, Antarel came from Apu. They said they were time travelers and they were related to us. And they were willing to land, but with Sisto Paz in that group, and there were 200 people involved in these meditations, they would fast and meditate, and then the ship would land. And I've talked to Sisto, and I've talked to his brother Charlie, transgendered into Veronica Paz Wells. And personally, I've gone to see Veronica up in Canada. And this happened. The beings would land and tell these guys to come on the ship. There were 10 in the beginning. And they were all young. They were all in their 20s. And Ricardo was involved with that group of people because with automatic writing, he was told to go to he was in Lima, and he was told to go to the roof of his house. and they would fly over, and they did, and his parents were there and saw it. And from that point on, the contact was real because you have to give permission. So I ended up in the Chilca Desert with Ricardo at the exact spot he was told to go when he first met, um, 10 foot tall Antarel. And I was standing in the exact spot, and he explained it how Antarel came over to him, and it sounded like clank, clank, clank. And I have the clip because I was there and it was being filmed. I wanted to understand uh, why. And Ricardo, I think, has had a total in his, now he's in his 40s. He was in his 20s then. I think a total of 8 face-to-face meetings with Antarel and Ivica. And I was there when he met Ivica in the Atacama Desert. I wanted to see how this worked. It's a lot of work because I ended up in the hospital with altitude sickness, and I ended up in the Valley of the Moon, meditating with all these Spanish people, these Hispanic people who followed Ricardo for 2 hours. But the ships did stop. There is no flight plan. There is no flights over the Atacama Desert, and I saw the whole thing happening. And Ricardo disappearing into the sand dunes to meet Ivica and coming back with a message. He was in tears. I'll never forget it because the message was that the planet is having ecological problems, and the problem was going to be with water. So I'm watching the news every day, and there's so much flooding all over the place. Every night there's flooding in Texas and flooding all over the place. She said, watch it because the planet is having its problems ecologically. So it's not a myth. So, and she could also see the future. They could also see that we're on a timeline that we need to make some decisions here if we're going to survive or not. It's not a positive thing, but it's within our control. And so I had to be, it can't be that you tell me this on the phone or I read it. I had to be on location when he actually had this experience. And of course, it's, if you're in the Andes, it's over 2,000 meters. And I can't do it again because I just told you, I'm having a few problems, I'm 79, so I keep going. I keep going. I have to, but I will return to Latin America, but I can't do the Atacama Desert, I don't think, anymore. I wanted personally to see what was going on with these contactees. And in my book, All of the Above and Beyond, there are 5 contactees. There is an interview with Luis Fernando Mostacia, whom I met. He is from Bolivia, and he sees ships come out of Lake Titicaca. Now, I can't go there because that is too high for me. But I had him come to my conference in Laughlin. I've talked to him on Zoom. I've seen him in person in Barcelona. So I know these people are reputable. Enrique Villanueva from Peru. Uh, uh, Claudio Vela from Peru. So many people are in that book who have had face-to-face contact with who we call the Space Brothers. And they're in Latin America. And people say, well, why there? Why don't they come here? Why would they come here? When we're trying to play this as if it's some kind of hobby, and they're playing it like, we're connected with you. We're telling you to watch the planet. We have these messages for you. And the only connection, and I maintain this, Vinny, that you can have with an extraterrestrial is a heart connection. He's alive, you're alive. You can't have a brain connection. They didn't go to school. They didn't even go to school to learn your language. It's telepathic. It's direct thought transfer. So, I mean, do the Chinese and the and other countries have contact? Yes, and they have it in their language. And if they pick people that they can have a heart connection with, not an intellectual, because you can't go there intellectually. This is so foreign from anything that we ever experience. I don't know where you want to go with that. Uh, if they find, that's why in South America it was so easy for me to work, because I'd ask the people that were working the fields, have you ever seen anything? Oh yes, the Space Brothers. Oh yes, it's normal. But I also came to the conclusion they have the indigenous people, the Aztecs, the Mayas, the Native Americans have their creation stories from the stars. They're already ready for this. They have a mindset, just like Billy Meyer was in an ashram for many, many years in India. People don't even realize that. And so was Dembski. He was in Tibet. So the beings are going to pick somebody who already has that philosophy. They're not going to pick somebody who is just worried about the stock market. They're going to pick somebody who has a spiritual base, or an ancient base, ancient like Aztec, Maya, Lakota, you know, and these are the conclusions I'm sharing with you from 40 years of research.
Yeah, I can relate. I actually I went out to Colombia 2 years in a row to investigate a case on the edge of the Andean Mountains, and spoke to a lot of indigenous Muisca people out there. And it's just everyday life to them. It's just completely normal. There's no taboo or stigma associated with it. And it was incredible to be around, just to feel that comfort of being able to talk about this subject without, having to worry about it in any way. And I can relate to the altitude as well. Having to climb the mountains there was unbelievably hard, even at my age. So I take my hat off to you to still be going out and doing those kind of things. That's incredible. So yeah, there's just something about South America.
Yeah, I was in Bogota, Colombia. I spoke in Tabio, the place called Tabio. And Tabio had
That's where
had,
I was. That's where I was
were
in
you?
Tabio.
I
Yes.
was in Tabio. And of course it was very, very difficult. It's hard because I can understand Spanish because it's like Italian, but they live a different lifestyle. And so when I was asking them questions, well, Tabio is a hotspot for UFOs. You know that.
Exactly. We were there. We filmed two series of a documentary series. I'll send it to you.
Okay. I was there too. I was, yeah, but I could talk about it in the United States. Nobody cares here. It's like I could talk about it forever. And they're back at the government disclosure and pilots. And I'm going, yeah, you stay with pilots, go ahead with government disclosure, but you go to Tabio and you'll see what you need to see.
Yes, absolutely. We managed to see some very strange lights and filmed it as well, and it forms part of the documentary series. So I would love for you to see it and then let me know what you think. That's incredible. Wow. I'm really happy with that. Um, let's move on. I'd like to talk about John Mack because, even to this day, we're nearly on 20 years since he unfortunately passed away. And it seems that nobody has kind of been even close to being, doing the work that he did. So what are your thoughts on John Mack and what he did?
Well, it's a long story because I knew him really well. In fact, he was at my house in Rome. When I lived in Rome, I had him at a conference. He's so sweet. He came because he was invited by a group of young people in Florence. And so he came to Rome. Unfortunately, he got pickpocketed, his cell phone and his camera. I remember coming back from school and he's talking to my mother, and I'm going, what happened? And she said, oh, he got pickpocketed at the forum. So anyway, I spent a lot of time with him. He was beautiful in person and wanted to talk to the young people because he had changed his mind. Originally, he had the same, good and evil ideas of abductions that, those other guys had. I'm not going to mention them. But he began to realize that this had to do with the raising of consciousness, and that it wasn't necessarily, I always tell people, look, uh, the paranormal is different levels of dimensions. I was very close with Monsignor Balducci, and he told me the devil had nothing to do with UFOs. I used to have dinner with him. He was papal nuncio, and he was an exorcist. And so you can get involved with beings that are not positive, that are not ET. So you're blaming everything on ET. And I'm going, yeah, if you're playing with a Ouija board or you're playing with beings or, that kind of thing, you're inviting trouble and it's not coming from another planet. And then it gets a bad rap and we spend the whole time in the US here on abductions, and ETs don't need to do that kind of thing. Okay. So the thing is that the CIA was really happy because then it keeps everybody under fear. Everybody's scared to death. Nobody's going to talk. People come up and say, I've been taken. I say, no, you haven't. You've been contacted. You haven't been taken because you're in front of me. If you had been taken, if they abduct somebody anywhere, they're going to kill you and throw you in the trash. So, and it gets to be tricky. So John, so for people that want to read his last lecture, and I translated it in Florence, it's in my book, Connecting the Dots. Connecting the Dots has just been translated into Japanese. It has 38 interviews in it. And it's got Allen Hynek, John Mack, David Icke, Monsignor Balducci, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut that was a very good friend of mine, Zachariah Sitchin. It's got, oh my God, it's got Clark McClellan, Ground Crew astronaut, NASA. It's got so many people. It's got Travis. It's got so many people, 38 interviews of people that told me firsthand what was going on. Because as an investigative journalist, my job is just to get the data. It wasn't until later on that I got involved with the Latin American stuff that I realized that I was some kind of cosmic bridge, that this had all been pre-programmed and I had to get the consciousness element in there too. So the Japanese book is called From Data Research to Consciousness, where John was just before he died. And that was an accident, by the way, because when I was in Florence with John, I had to push him on the sidewalk. He would be so interested in all the beautiful Renaissance buildings and everything, and I kept pushing him on the sidewalk. So here he is walking in London, on the wrong side of you look at the wrong side of the road, and there was nobody with him. I never left him alone when either my mother or I were with him when he was in Italy. Italy is in Rome is a big city like London. So do I miss him? Yes. Does anybody else at Harvard want to take this on? No. Harvard as it is, has Avi Leb, but I'm not convinced that isn't without problems. With a lot of these universities are going to risk their reputations. John was a pioneer. John was a courageous man. John had a sense of integrity. And as far as hypnotherapists, there's 50 million of them. So it isn't like there's all kinds of hypnotherapists. But a John Mack is different because a John Mack changed his mind. A John Mack came to a very spiritual conclusion.
Yeah, no, he's definitely very, very missed in this subject for sure, and in general. But one thing I really would like to ask you about is, a lot of people, whether they're new to the subject or just have a sort of fleeting interest, really sort of seem to start around the 40s. But this is a phenomenon that's been going on for millennia, right? Are these beings always been here or visiting or around us? Did they play a part in seeding the human race? What are your thoughts on the history going right back?
Well, I can't cover all of that. I can only cover what I can cover in my lifetime, but it's logical. I mean, if you do any kind of historical research, it's logical. It would be logical that the mankind, and I don't buy, even though I interviewed Zachariah Sitchin, that the Anunnaki created all of us. No, if you go down to Latin America, it's the Popol Vuh, it's the ant people, the people from underground. If you go to Lakota, it's the people from the Pleiades that came from the stars. It can't be that one, Anunnaki came and did the whole entire world. You could do that in the Middle East. the Tigris and Euphrates River, because that is biblically where civilization began. The thing, Vinny, is if they would just get it together and have a university class with all the research and all the ancient alien stuff and all the current research and the messages from Latin America, they could put together the piece of the puzzle. But our field, unfortunately, is so fragmented, and so there's it's a real problem in the field, because there isn't any kind of cooperation to find the truth. I think, if people, that's why all my stuff is at Rice University right now, and Jacques Vallée's stuff is there in Houston, and John Mack's material is there. I had Clifford Stone's papers shipped there. Whitley Striever is there. I mean, maybe someday when it's okay, it's in something called the Archives of the Impossible. People will sit down and look at all this and put it together. Um, but for me, it's frustrating because I can't have an intelligent conversation with anybody because they haven't done the homework. All they do is go on a 5-minute YouTube and they have the answers to everything. And as a teacher, I would never give you a grade for that. As a teacher, you would have had to read Allen Hynek's book. You would have had to read John Mack's book. You would have had to read, the interviews that I had done. And may I again say that Connecting the Dots has 38 interviews, and at the end of that, you'll go, "Oh my God, this is what everybody said." And I'll say, "Yeah, it wasn't what I said. I just asked the right questions."
Yeah, no, I'm a big proponent of research. That's kind of my background in this subject. I've been in it for 15 years plus now, and for a good 10 years, all I did was research before I, put my face into the public domain or even thought about doing a podcast or anything. It's research, and I always tell people, if you want answers, do the research, because you'll make your own mind up. You don't have to listen to other people's opinions. You can do it for yourself, and I find that to be the most important and valuable asset to being a good researcher. So I fully, I know what you're saying. But why do you think the community, the UFO community, is so fragmented? What is it about it?
Well, there's no money. There's no money in it. I mean, I can't even tell you, just doing Trinity. And I went there to Socorro, New Mexico, uh, in 10 years, at least 3 times a year. And if you count that, that's $1,000 every time I go there, hotel, airfare, and I paid for a lot of the witness stuff. That's almost $20,000 that'll never come back. It's Yeah, but that I had to do that because for me, by the way, I did interview all the Roswell people before he died. I interviewed um, Glenn Dennis, the mortician. He told me that he was asked for 6 children's caskets. I interviewed Walter Hott, who left deathbed testimony. I had Jesse Marcel Jr. in my house in Rome, the 9-year-old that had the pieces that his father brought home. I had him and his family. So I did a lot on Roswell. But I found that a lot of the pushback came because it seemed like we were in competition with Roswell, because 1945 was the first crash. It was not Roswell, but Roswell has become the mecca commercially of everything. So the problem is when you're dealing with money, it gets to be really tricky. And the 1945 crash was 1 month after the atomic bomb. And that's logical. And I got that by accident, by the way. I started working, I was in Italy and I read the account of the 2 little boys. I was in Italy and I thought, because I came back to the United States in 2007, and I said, why are my colleagues going to talk to them? They're still alive. I mean, the problem is some of these people, by the time I got to them, they were 90 years old. Gaspard Gulama, Robert Short was in his 80s. He died shortly after. And I'm trying to get to them before they go. And so nobody went there. And then by accident or design, the son of the pilot that flew over that area, and by the way, that area has the witnesses, the exact location. Roswell has 3 miles of strewn, stuff all over the place. You can't find the exact location. We have the exact location, the 2 witnesses. Actually, we have 4. if you read Trinity, because I found two others, and a piece that the 9-year-old went in from the inside and pulled off. Now, what more do you want? So why would anybody argue about that? I'm thinking, okay, so Jacques was interested in the metal, and that's why he came aboard the piece. He was interested in the piece, but the more he got involved, the more he kept going back to the place. He kept saying, oh my God. And I said, well, I don't think they're on vacation. I think this is a statement about the atomic bomb. And Jacques, I'm going to throw another one at you. They knew we were going to write a book. Otherwise, why bother crash? And then it gets really hard because then you have to deal with time travel. You have to deal with future stuff. You have to deal with all that crazy stuff that drives me nuts. I can't, I'm trying really hard, Vinny, to wrap my mind around all that.
Yeah, it's difficult.
Because obviously the beings knew. Otherwise, why would they know? Not only do they know, I find that whenever I deal with beings, especially the South American ones, they know what you're doing. They know you're talking about them, and they know. And I've had all kinds of paranormal stuff. I remember coming home and my landline would do Morse code after with Ricardo Gonzalez. I mean, it would beep like crazy, and I'm going, what is going on here? So the paranormal is really tied up with the phenomena. And people say it's not paranormal. Absolutely, it's not paranormal. But our problem is that we can't discuss it with scientists and intelligent people who have an open mind. If we could do that, we know it wasn't paranormal. We know that stuff is dimensional. We know everybody wasn't being abducted. And we know that there was a definite plan here. So there's no discussion. What are the people? Because I told you it's either money or jealousy or fame or something. I have, really struggled to make it academic. I really would love to go to a university and teach a series of classes on this.
Yeah, I think that would open the subject up to a much broader audience, especially of young people who, we need more young people to come into this subject and keep it going. So, I mean, you've done so much on this subject in your time, Paola. What else is there left for you to do? Do you have anything new that you're working on currently?
Well, I'm still trying to piece together the past. Um, I as far as Latin America, I'd go back in one New York minute. First of all, if anybody had any funds, they should go and cover the friendship case in Chile. They should cover that. That's just as important as the friendship case in Italy. Ortiz is still alive, and the island is still there, and those guys on the island were curing people. They had technology that could cure. I think it was electromagnetic technology because they cured Fuentes. He was dying of lung cancer. So that's important stuff. It isn't American, it isn't European, but it's important. There's a case in Italy, the Zanfretta case. I haven't been able to get anybody to sponsor that. Pier Fortunato Zanfretta was taken in the 1970s by these beings, and the police have all the records, including the footprint of the beings. People don't even know about it. But I can't sponsor anymore at this age these kinds of expeditions. But that case is amazing. Those beings used him to, they would use him. They put an implant in his brain. He would walk into the ship. And I've been on the mountain where he walked into the ship. And it was a mountain where he'd have to go at midnight. And he would put his forehead against the screen, and they would extract his memories for 2 weeks because these guys were so ugly and so tall. They were 15 feet tall. They could not walk among us, so they chose somebody that they could see how we lived. And that case has not been done. And I'm going, okay, well, I don't have the money to go running around and doing this anymore like I used to. But that case is in Genoa, in Italy. And I did do the Mauricio Cavallo case, and I had to go back 3 times. He had Polaroids of the beings that came from Clarion. And he told me at the very, very end about the Polaroids because I went back 3 times. I didn't know if I wanted to do it. It sounded crazy. Um, but he showed me the Polaroids. That's online. And you can't use Adobe Photoshop on Polaroids. So, it was people that you say, oh, the pictures are too clear, whatever. Well, then, one of the cases I just did in 2023 is I went back to Howard Menger. Nobody had gone there to Howard Menger's house in High Bridge, New Jersey, where Val Thor was sitting with two of his, stranger in the Pentagon. He was from Venus. Jill and Don were sitting there, and I happened to have the letter of the photographer, plus everything of the photographer that had written to Wendell Stevens about he didn't know which ones they were. I have the letter with all the calligraphy of the photographer. And so I wanted to go back to Howard Menger's house, which is empty, by the way, to find the exact spot where Val Thor was sitting. And for 2 reasons, we photographed it. We did. I went back with 2 other researchers that were really interesting, but it's too late because I mean, it isn't too late. But if people had even paid attention to the Menger story, it was amazing because he has photographs. He's the one that got the fruit pods. He has movies. The FBI was involved. He was sent to Colorado Springs. And I have a picture of him in front of Condon here, when they had the Condon Committee report with his book open in front of Condon. So have these poor contactees tried to tell the truth? Yes. And when I went back, and I'll be honest with you, Vinny, the reason why I wanted to go there is I knew Val Thor, who was from Venus, and the other 2 guys were really sitting there. I knew August Roberts had taken the photos, and I wanted to say, hey, we could use your help a second time around here. We're in a Cold War. Russia is the enemy again. We're in the Cold War. We're making mistakes left and right. You were here during the Cold War. 63 was during the Cold War. Because you have to look at this geopolitically. They're not hopping around on vacation. They're here at key times in the history of the planet. So in 2023, I went to the exact spot where he was sitting. I said, hey, if there's anything you can do. So that I know that story is fascinating to you, but for people who want to read that, read From Outer Space to You. It's a true story. At the very end of From Outer Space to You from Howard Menger, there's 30 pages saying the reason why Val Thor and those guys were coming is because they live longer than we do. We're on pharmaceuticals, and you have to keep your blood alkaline. And this is at the end. This is what the Venusians are saying. Keep your blood alkaline because cancer and all those, diseases come from acid blood. And so, do they care about us? Yeah, I don't think they're here to eat us. It's that book just changed my life because that's when I started doing the giant rock, going back to the future, what I call going back to the future. So I just did that in 2023. Now, what will I do tomorrow? If I get a story, the problem is the financial burden that it poses on having to go back there, stay in a hotel, film the whole thing and everything. But it's so interesting, isn't it? Isn't it interesting? Because that really did happen. It happened in 1963. If people want to know the year, it was 1963.
Yeah, I think with any case, like you said earlier, to be able to go and visit and be there in person really just it makes such a difference no matter what it is. It's you can't do a lot of things sat at a computer behind at a desk. You have to be on location. So I really appreciate anybody that gets out there and actually puts in the work. But Paola, one last thing I'd like to speak to you about before I let you go is Colonel Corso. So what can you tell me about Colonel Corso?
Oh, Lord have mercy. All right, tell everybody, and this isn't about a book, this is about an obligation. My book, Conversations with Colonel Corso on Amazon, are the result of my having an audio tape in my pocket and asking him all the questions that I asked him. The thing is that in 1997, there was the 50th anniversary of Roswell. And I was in Italy. I was working for my boss, Maurizio Baiada, in Area 51 magazine. And he said to me, well, this book is coming out. You got to go cover the story. And I don't want to do it. because I hadn't read the book. I didn't know what he looked like, and I just didn't want to do it. And he said, "No, Paula," he said, "this book is going to change everything. You need to find this guy. You need to go and do the story." So with the help of people that met me at the airport, I got to Roswell. Everybody was there, big party. Everybody was there. I mean, everybody, you name them in the field, and they were there. And John Mack was there. Michael Heseman, Linda Howe, Bud Hopkins, Whitley Strieber, you name them, they were all there. And that, unfortunately, our field is one big party. It's the way it was. I will tell you a side story, though. It's important because when I got there, first of all, when I got there, I didn't have a place to stay. They had booked it because it was going to be one big party. And I went to the media place and I said, "I don't have a place to stay. I'm from Italy. I got to cover this story." And they said, "You better open up the phone book and just find your own place." And the place I found was Sally Port Inn. I called up. They had a room for 3 nights, and the room was next to Colonel Corso. So if somebody tells me that's not pre-programmed. So what happened was, and this is a side story, I was hanging around, and Clifford Stone comes up and invites everybody, all the big researchers and everybody, to his house. And I was with Victoria Paccaccini, who did, by the way, the Virginia case. You know the Virginia case, right? Brazil, the little being that was running around live. And I was with him. He had just done that. And so we're the only foreign journalists, and we're going, "Okay, Clifford, we'll come to your house." Everybody else was at the bar. I mean, they're having party and everything. So Victoria and I went to his house, and Clifford comes and throws a bunch of um, microfiche boxes and a big canister on his coffee table, and I'm supposed to film everything. So, and I'm sending it back FedEx. So I'm looking at this canister, and it has a date of 19, I think it was 1958 or 1963, but it was an old tag on it. And I'm filming it and everything, and I send it back to my boss. And my boss says, "Paula, that was the Holloman landing. Why didn't you ask to see that?" So if my researcher friends had gone there, they would have recognized it, but I didn't. Like I told you, I didn't know what Adamski was in 1997. I was getting educated along the way. So I called Clifford, and I said, "You had the Holloman landing on that coffee table and you didn't show it to me?" And he goes, "Well, the CIA gave it to me and said none of the researchers are really interested." He said, "If they ask to see it, show it to them. It's the first 8 minutes of the landing in Holloman with what's his name, General Eisenhower, or with President Eisenhower at that time." And I said, "But you didn't tell me." And he said, "You didn't ask me to see it." And I said, "What happened to it?" And he goes, "They came and got it the next day, and they said, 'See, nobody came to your house that asked. See, no, but they're really not interested.'" I said, "They took it away." I said, "Did you ever see it? Can you tell me what's on it?" And he goes, "Yeah." He said, "It's the exact scenario that you see in the film It Has Begun by Robert Ebenaker. It's the beings are not Greys, they're not Nordics, they're Semitic looking. they had they had maroon outfits, and you could see the cars come up. See, and there is 3 seconds. If you see It Has Begun, those 3 seconds of that thing coming down at Holloman is real. So 3 seconds of that film footage is real. It was given to Emenager, and then the rest, they tell about it. They tell about it. What if there was a landing? And he said that the rest is what's on there. So here's me and Paccaccini, the only ones that are at Clifford Stone's house, who did 12 crash retrievals, by the way. I also helped print his book. He talked into a microphone. His book, Eyes Only, has his life story in it. These are real people that dealt with real beings. So anyway, I go back to the hotel, and Colonel Corso is doing a press conference, and nobody can get close to him. Nobody can get close to him. So this blonde guy comes up and says, "Speak to my father in Italian." Because Colonel Corso was the head of intelligence in 1945 in Rome. the singular head of intelligence at 28 years old. And how do I know that? Because I walked him through Rome, his hotel, and everywhere he was. Because at that time, there was a lawsuit against the book, his co-writer, and the company that was involved. And that shut the book down. He couldn't do lectures. So I was able to invite him to Italy for 2 years. And so that's why we printed his real manuscript, The Dawn of a New Age, in Italian the day after Roswell's not his real manuscript. I think if you go look for The Dawn of a New Age online, you find it under Open Minds. We printed his manuscript, we told the real story, and unfortunately, Colonel Corso was very despondent with the whole UFO community. He only got to speak in Italy. But since he was in Italy, I was able to walk up and down the streets of Rome with him and get all kinds of information. That he did brief Bobby Kennedy. So if he briefed Bobby Kennedy, Jack Kennedy knew. Obviously, he's the head of intelligence. He worked under General Trudeau. He worked at Sperry Rand, which is government contractor. They back engineered everything by using big envelopes of money. They did not leave a paper trail. He told me the companies he went to. He wasn't lying. He was telling the truth. And the problem is that for Paula, that is the real disclosure. He told me how it was done. I didn't understand why we didn't have disclosure. I thought it was religious or something. No, it's the military industrial complex. It's the money that's being made from the toys. And in this particular case, it was the Army. So everybody accused Corso. They said, you're lying because it's in the general public. Yeah, the Air Force had it because it was Army Air Force in 1945. That craft that Jacques and I were talking about, what do you think they did? Throw it in the trash? I mean, they took it and it was Army Air Force. So the Air Force could have been doing that, but the Army and the Navy. And then I came to find out through NASA that the Navy is in charge of UFOs because it's the other ocean. And we're Navy. Most of the astronauts are Navy pilots. So I was able to put it together. The greatest disclosure is Colonel Philip Corso. His manuscript, Dawn of a New Age, includes his meeting an ET in White Sands because he wouldn't shut his missiles down. He wouldn't shut the radars down. The thing, I call him the thing. The being was caught in the cave there, couldn't take off. And Colonel Corso, being Sicilian, and I know he's Sicilian because all the Sicilians came to meet him. He was a big hero during World War II. Pointed a gun at the being. And of course, I didn't want this interview. I will tell you that Paula is very careful. I said, I'm not going to print this because they'll think you're crazy. It wasn't after he died that I printed it. The being said, could you shut down your radars? Corso with a gun, a Beretta, points it at him and says, friend or foe. And he asked me, he said, what do you think he said? I said, he said, neither. Not a friend. They're not friends and they're not enemies. They're just there. And Corso said, the being said, would you like to come aboard? I'll show you. And Corso said, what do you have to offer me? And all my colleagues have used it. A new world if you can take it. Okay, so he wrote it on a napkin. And my biggest problem was, I don't want to release this because they'll think he's nuts. I just want the back engineering stuff. I don't want. But then I began to realize that was the biggest disclosure that was there. And you can, by the way, there's an autopsy drawing in conversations with Colonel Corso that I wrote. He gave me the drawing. He saw beings at Fort Belvoir. And he compared the being, the physical being to, he also gave me a propulsion drawing. He told me that when he was gone, I had to continue to talk about him. Well, I don't understand what's going on because for me, that's the greatest disclosure ever. And everybody's looking at government hearings when this guy told everything. And he was during the Kennedy administration. So, we're dealing with a couple of things there. Who was the head of the CIA was Jesse Jesus Angleton at Kennedy administration. Colonel Corso, they all knew. I mean, apart from the fact they would have to know. If what's his name, Corso is briefing Bobby, Jack knows. They don't know what to do about it. I mean, what do you do about it? So it's real. So what do you do about it? This is the problem. This is a problem even with the government. What are you going to do about it? You can't control that. You can't control if they decide to fly by. You can't control any of that. Um, so for me, for Paula, this is the final words. Colonel, I tried my best. Everything you told me word for word, because I can't make any of that up. I have no idea what goes on in government behind closed doors. I think I asked the right questions. It's in conversations with Colonel Corso. And for me, I don't know what you're looking at Washington for, or any of those guys, when you have the guy telling you from the Army now. He's just from the Army. Like Clifford Stone is just from the Army crash retrieval. They're telling you their story and they're telling the truth. We've lost them. We've lost some very great people.
We have, unfortunately. Yeah. Well, listen, Paula, thank you so much for spending time with me today. I really appreciate your insights and all of the work that you've done. And I will make sure that in the description of this interview, I have links to all of your books and to your YouTube channel where people can go and look at all the other things that you've done. But once again, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you. And thank you for going to South America. You make me feel good that somebody else is doing it.
Absolutely. And I can't wait to go back. But yeah, hopefully next year. We'll see. Just a message to everybody, everyone that's watching as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please leave comments, like the video, and share it with your friends. I really appreciate it. But for now, we'll see you on the next one. Take care and goodbye.